Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this night together, and you've got us with your Spirit in all truth. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we are in John chapter 5. As a review, the purpose of John's Gospel is this: these things that are written, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have eternal life. Holy Spirit, guide us. John 5, 1 to 15, Ron.
After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem by the Sheep's Gate, there was a pool, called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many individuals, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now on that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is a Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is that man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well.
Thank you. Okay. Bethesda means house of mercy. And this is a location you can still see today if you go to Jerusalem. What do we know about the Sheep Gate in terms of the ancient city? It was where the sacrificial animals were taken in to the city on their way to the temple. There were different gates around the city for different purposes. There was some feast. There were 3 required feasts that Jews would go to every year. We're not told by John which specific one this was. It doesn't really matter. But this is a time when there'd be a lot of people in the city, right? After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, as he would do, as an observant Jew. And there by the Sheep Gate is a pool called Bethesda, meaning house of mercy. It has 5 porticos. And it was very likely that there were different invalids stacked all over the place on different porticos. And what happens in this account? Let's review it. Or more specifically, let me ask you this. What is similar to the encounter that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman as we look at this encounter? You can see the differences, but what are the similarities?
He was an outcast. This guy's an outcast also. Similar.
Also, both the woman and this ill man, they both wanted to be healed. They wanted to be better. Not everybody wants to be better.
And Jesus approached both of them. He sought them out.
Water.
Yeah.
Living water. Living.
Also people that are in kind of a terminal state. I mean, the woman was an outcast. I mean, there was no way she was outside of Jesus that she could have changed her perceptions of her past type of thing in front of the other people. And the same thing with this guy that's been sick for 38 years. The chances of him, getting that well are probably so. The kind of not terminal, but
spring-fed source of water, so maybe it was a natural occurrence. They assigned some kind of angelic influence there.
If whoever got in first after water stirred, then that person would be healed. And that's why the man couldn't get in, because he was lame, and other people could be faster than he could. So he was sitting there for years not being able to get to the pool in time.
What do we make of Jesus' question in verse 6? Do you want to be healed?
Yeah, that's a key.
Is there more to it than what might appear initially? Who's been there for 38 years, Jesus says, do you want to be healed?
Beggars can make a pretty good living just being like mercy of other people. And being healed would mean functioning normally in society. I was also thinking that in both instances, Jesus starts the dialogue by asking the people a question. Will you get me a drink? Do you want to get healed? So he's opening the conversation up. He's inviting the dialogue.
And also maybe in these situations, he's very familiar and comfortable with his state. You know, change could be kind of scary. He knows exactly what to expect. And I think we find ourselves in that position often.
And see, the lame for 38 years is probably advanced in age. And to suddenly have to find a new occupation would be stressful too.
He's also speaking to the hopelessness. Speaking directly to that. Do you have the desire left in you? I am the hope, that's what he's saying. If you don't have desire.
And the man, he didn't ask to be healed, so I guess he opened up the question. The man he didn't indicate that he wanted to be healed, so he asked.
Is there anything significant to the 38? I mean, the number is just that it's a long time, because it seemed like, I'm having a senior moment, but it seems like that number had popped up somewhere before, whether it was maybe months or something, I don't know. Is it
Well,
just,
in John's gospel, numbers are often given to signify certain things, but I don't know that this is in any way connected to anything that's significant. Like the catch of fish at the end of the gospel and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that when we get there. There are symbolic connections that many people look to, but I think this is just to say that he's been there a long time. He's of age, he's an adult. And one thing we know is that he was not able to go to the temple and worship because of his condition. So he was an outcast in every sense of the word. But we'll see what happens next. Here's a question. Verse 8, Jesus said to him, rise, take up your pallet, and walk. Now, last week we looked at Mark, didn't we? A similar instruction. Is it easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or rise, pick up your pallet and walk? So that you may know that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins, I say to you, rise, pick up your mat and walk. So it's interesting to see the connection there. But we're also told that this is the Sabbath. Just to give us some context here, especially when we see what Jesus will be up against with the religious authorities, Chris, would you please read for us Jeremiah 17, 19 to 27? And just to give you a little heads up, this is about not carrying any commerce load on the Sabbath.
Keeping the Sabbath day holy. This is what the Lord said to me. Go and stand at the gate of the people, in which the kings of Judah go in and out. Stand also at all the other gates at Jerusalem. Say to them, hear the word of the Lord, you kings of Judah and all people of Judah, and everyone living in Jerusalem who comes through these gates. This is what the Lord says. Be careful not to carry a load on the Sabbath day, or bring it through the gates of Jerusalem. Do not bring a load out of your houses, or do any work on the Sabbath, but keep the Sabbath day holy, as I have commanded your ancestors. Yet they did not listen or pay attention. They were stiff-necked, and they would not listen or respond to discipline. But if you are careful to obey me, declares the Lord, and bring no load through the gates of this city on the Sabbath, but keep the Sabbath day holy, by not doing any work on it, then kings who sit on David's throne will come through the gates of this city with their officials. They and their officials will come riding in chariots and on horses, accompanied by the men of Judah and those living in Jerusalem. And this city will be inhabited forever. People will come from the towns of Judah and the villages around Jerusalem, from the territory of Benjamin and the western foothills, from the hill country and the Negev, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices, grain offerings and incense, and bringing thank offerings to the house of the Lord. But if you do not obey me to keep the Sabbath day holy, by not carrying any load as you come through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle an unquenchable fire in the gates of Jerusalem that will consume the fortresses.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that's quite a strong emphasis on gates, carrying loads, Jerusalem, right? I mean, they would have known that scripture. So what's happening here? They're right outside the sheep's gate. Jesus says, rise, pick up your pallet, and walk. It would seem to be a direct violation of the Sabbath rule. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his pallet and walked. So now we get into the dialogue, the fallout, if you will. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who was cured, it is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your pallet. Okay, we know where that comes from then, right? And the consequences of doing that, we also heard, were pretty severe. But he answered them, the man who healed me said to me, take up your pallet and walk. So what's happening here? He's shifting blame to Jesus, right? He did. He told me to do it. It's not my fault. I was just laying here for 38 years.
I'm walking.
But I'm walking.
Yeah, I'm gonna take advantage of that.
Yeah. I mean, he could have had so many different responses. As opposed to, like, blaming someone, he could say, I don't care what you say, I'm healed. Do you see what's happening? The man who healed me said to me, take up your pallet and walk. They asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your pallet and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. What's going on here?
I just want to draw attention to what he just did. He did this a couple times before. He does it, have to do it.
Try to throw him off the cliff
Yeah.
in his hometown, and he passed through the midst of them and went another way, it says. That's very mysterious how he did that.
Yeah.
We do know that after he was resurrected, he could pass through walls and just show up in places. So here he disappears, withdraws, as there's a big crowd. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple. That's what's going on. So he goes to the temple. Presumably the first time in his life he's been able to go to the temple. That's pretty interesting. He wants to go worship. You ever see? Jesus finds him. He said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse befall you. And we started to touch on this concept last week, didn't we? Why is Jesus saying this?
It shows that Jesus has the ability to forgive sin.
There does seem to be a connection to the reading we looked at last week from Mark.
He's tying healing, freedom, and forgiveness of sins together. Because if the man was able to get up and walk, he was receiving freedom that he hadn't had for 38 years. He could actually do things on his own. And so he was healed, he was set free. Jesus obviously was saying, I've forgiven you, don't sin anymore. Without saying it directly, he said, don't sin or something worse will happen to you. Pretty much saying that your healing is attributable to what I've done for you.
I think the reaction of, when you said earlier, the reaction of the guy that was healed, it obviously shows that the Pharisees and everything had a lot of clout, because if he's trying to kind of, even though he's healed, trying to pass the blame into Jesus, it shows that they had a lot of clout. And I think if you kind of, to me, if I look at kind of how all these things kind of fit together. It's like, Jesus goes down one path and, he attacks the money changers, he attacks a lot of the things in the temple, but then he goes around and he goes out of Jerusalem where he does a lot of the miracles, kind of to different pockets, or, he goes to the Samaritan lady, he goes to a Roman authority, so he's hitting different people. And now this kind of brings both of them together, where he's doing a miracle at an outcast, at the same time trying to break down the paradigms of the Pharisees on a lot of the rules on the Sabbath. So to me, it's kind of like bringing kind of both paths together after he's built up, some momentum, I guess, from some of that.
It's also notable that the temple is a conversation piece both with the woman at the well and in this event here. It centers around the concept of the temple, meaning we'll later see how it's not going to be as relevant as it had been. Now, something's coming to an end and something new is beginning.
No, it's probably too with that sheepscape. That whole thing about the old style sacrifice is probably the reason why that's probably in here too. That's kind of going.
Yes, and connected to that is when John tells us that John the Baptist points to Jesus and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." That's a sign from the beginning that Jesus will be that Lamb that will come to the city gates as the sacrificial victim and victor.
Just out of curiosity, the sentence that says, "Sin no more, that nothing worse before you." Does Jesus use that word worse often? Because it seems like that was a pretty, 38 years this guy's been raising doing. Worse is like, instead of just saying sin no more and go about your business. The woman, I don't believe he said worse, anything. Is that word used?
John chapter 9, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Jesus will address the whole concept of, does a person's sin cause ailments? And he actually says in that context, it's so that God may be glorified. But in this case, there seems to be a declaration that the central condition of humanity spawns ailments. So it's both and.
And he said elsewhere, he said, don't fear those who can, harm the body or kill the body, but fear the one who can cast you into hell forever. So maybe that might be worse.
I think so.
Next stop.
All right, great comments. Any others as we prepare to transition to verse 16 to 23?
Just an observation that I'm just thinking about living water and the connection of living water between the woman at the well and here. The water is considered living because it moved, stirred up. I guess I'm thinking of it in terms of baptism. In early Christian churches, basilicas, the baptismal font was not inside the church. The church was built where there was a living water, where there was a spring of water. So there would always be water that was living, that was moving, that would flow. And that would be the place where baptism could take place. So that's another kind of healing. It's a later elaboration in theology, obviously. But I think it was important for this passage. Yeah.
Would you please read 16 to 23? And then we're going to keep up this whole conversation about carrying on the Sabbath.
Therefore the Jews began to persecute Jesus, because he did this on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is at work until now, so I am at work." For this reason the Jews tried all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but he also called himself God. He also called God his own Father, making himself equal to God. The work of the Son. Jesus answered and said to them, "Amen, amen, I say to you, a son cannot do anything on his own, but only what he sees his Father doing. For when he does, his son will do also. For the Father loves his Son and shows him everything that he himself does. And he will show him greater works than these, so that you may be amazed. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives life, so also does the Son give life to whomever he wishes. Nor does the Father judge anyone, but he has given all judgment to his Son. Number 23, one word. So that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him.
So what's the theme of that section?
Well, he's saying that he's God, he's the Son of God, and he's God of the same.
That's a powerful statement. They wanted to kill him over it, and that will come back during his time at the trial, that accusation. Yeah.
To me, it's kind of an interesting argument where they probably had do no work on the Sabbath because it goes back to probably Genesis on the, the seventh day you rest type of thing. But then he basically said, which is true. I mean, all the stuff going on, I mean, the whole world doesn't stop on the Sabbath. So God is out there doing things on the Sabbath. So it's kind of an interesting argument that he's basically saying, how come we're all rested yet, he's still doing his work.
That's a good point. Why don't we talk about that concept, and then we'll talk about Abba Father, because I think that's important here. Sure.
Sabbath observance was based on God's resting on the seventh day. Philo and some rabbis insisted that God's providence remains active on the Sabbath, keeping all things in existence, giving life in birth and taking away in death. Other rabbis taught that God rested from creating, but not from judging, therefore ruling or governing. Jesus here claims he has the same authority to work as the Father, and in the discourse that follows, the same divine prerogatives, power over life and death and judgment.
That is helpful. There was an argument at the time. Does God keep the law? You've already started the conversation, Ron, and you've added to that. Does God keep the law? Does God rest completely?
Yeah.
Right, because how does the universe continue on as it does?
Jesus also said that man was made for the Sabbath.
Yeah. The Sabbath is made for man,
Or Sabbath, yeah.
not man for the Sabbath, yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Sure.
But the rabbinical debates were very heated on this topic. And some came to a belief that, okay, God does only light work on the Sabbath. And that's where a lot of categories of what you can and can't do came from. So for instance, one rule or law that was established was you can lift something but not over your shoulders, because that would constitute heavy work. And so even today, in some places, like in New York City, some elevators, you may know this, have Sabbath elevators that run without touching the actual floor. So there are still rules in place today which try to get at this whole question of what can you do on the Sabbath and not do, what constitutes work. So Jesus talking about doing work with his Father, this is really packed with a lot of meaning. It has everything to do with how do you define work.
It's funny, on Thursday morning, we were focusing on that passage that is finished. I just was thinking about the simple way to look at the Sabbath is let go and let God. Just stop. He's in control. It's those moments where we just rest in him, and we don't. We can worry ourselves to death. That's lifting a lot more weight above our heads than reaching for a high elevator button. It's really just being nourished by him in ways that we can't accomplish. Our work does not accomplish that.
Yes. We talked about Jesus being our Sabbath, Lord Sabaoth, right? Our rest. What does that mean to us?
He is our righteousness, like from the verse yesterday from Jeremiah. The Lord is our righteousness. So all that work is for purity, is for being righteous. But it is finished, like you said. He did it. It's done. And so he's our rest.
All the not just on one day of the week.
There's also the sense that Sabbath was blessedness. That, I mean, it's a wonderful gift that people would have a day that they could rest. So, what could be more blessed than being healed, or or renewed, strengthened, or being fed like his disciples were accused of working in the Sabbath with the grain that they picked from the parched grain in the fields. So there's this a blessedness that Jesus supersedes the blessedness of just strict law obedience, it seems like. That's just an interpretation.
The passage in Hebrews 4:9 to 11. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by following their example of disobedience.
So was there actually two violations, right? I mean, one was the guy actually got up and walked, and he probably wasn't supposed to walk on the Sabbath, right?
Carry the load.
But he could carry his mat? That was what, okay. So the healing part was the part that violated the Sabbath?
Well, that was true. I mean, Jesus worked on the Sabbath by healing, which was the accusation in Mark. And
Yeah. So I mean, really,
yeah,
both of them were breaking the...
The guy could walk, because if you've ever been down, when, on a Friday evening in Williamsburg, New York, you see everyone running to the temple with their prayer shawls on, holding little kids' hands. Very little walk, but they can't do a lot of other things, that's for darn sure.
yeah.
This is very abstract, so excuse me.
That's what we do here.
This is abstract, this is off base. I relate some of this, maybe this is the way I interpret this a little bit, is the way God wanted the frailty of man. In other words, when he was at the Garden of Gethsemane, the soldiers came to get him, and all the apostles fell asleep on him. And he said, the spirit is strong, but the body is weak. And something like this, the work ethic, I mean, it's like the grand scheme that he knows that the people are weak. And that's what the Sabbath was supposed to do, force people to not do certain things. I mean, this is a real, no.
We talked about how the law was meant to be life-giving, and it is.
Yeah.
But it's also death-dealing, because it tells us we can't keep it.
Hmm.
And so we need grace. But the Ten Commandments are life-giving. They're good. They're not enough.
Ron, to what you were saying before, it wasn't against the Sabbath to walk, it was that he was carrying his mat.
Man, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Paul writes about the law. He said, I would not have known my sin if it weren't for the law. That point, like for coveting, he said, I wouldn't have known that was wrong if it weren't for the law. So the law, like, there's another advantage of the law. It's like a mirror.
What about this beautiful description Jesus gives of how he and the Father are working together?
It says that the Father is teaching him. And I think an important part of that part of Scripture is it says, for the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these he will show him, that you may marvel.
There's this active, beautiful relationship between the Father and the Son, confirmed by the Spirit. This is my Son, my beloved, whom I'm well pleased. Jesus is all about the Father's business, all about the Father's work. And then verse 21, Jesus takes it to a whole new level of promise for us. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to those whom he will. The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son. And we get a real insight into salvation in this passage.
This must have blown their minds, whoever he was talking to. They must have just said, because they thought he was just a man. But here he's equating himself with God.
Well, that was their anger, the nerve of this guy saying that he's God, equal to God.
absolutely, yeah, what could be worse, really?
No,
Calling
From
God
their
his
viewpoint.
father. Calling God his father.
It's like, not our father, my father, you said, that's really different too.
But he's given all judgment to the Son. So much for the Pharisees, right?
It's interesting that you said that, because it says, for the Father judges no one. I mean, it's, Jesus is saying, the Father's not judging anymore, it's my job. And that's, it's like, it's almost like, he's saying, Dad's abdicated the throne, I'm in charge now. Blunt language, I mean, if the Pharisees are hearing that, they're hearing, what the fuck?
Where's that?
You are. That's such a bold statement, that's just, it's saying God's over here, I'm in charge.
And we'll see that they accuse Jesus of having a demon. He's evil. This person's evil, what he's saying is wrong.
This is where C.S. Lewis picks up that those who say that Jesus is only a good man totally miss his words. If someone were to say something like this and not be God, he's kind of on the level of someone who's got a crack yoke.
It almost seems also that Paul may have, Paul the Pharisee may have been sitting there listening to this so that he was able to write first Colossians 1:15 through, where the supremacy of the Son of God, realizing that he's taking what Jesus said and saying the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things were created. That whole passage in Colossians about who Jesus is, he just listens to who Jesus was, like Jesus told him who he is.
In fact, we were going to read that section pretty soon. Why don't you just read it for us, Fred? If you're willing to.
15 through.
Yeah, I just signed Colossians 1:17, so if you don't mind. Okay. Report.
The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross.
Larry, how about adding one more thing to that? Hebrews 1:3.
Hebrews 1:3, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high.
So the idea is that if God doesn't fully rest on the Sabbath, nor does the Son, because he is the image of the invisible God. By him all things hold together. He's always working. Now they couldn't see that. But we see it coming. Right, so now
Amazing,
we're
at this
looking-
point, they didn't take up stones to try to stone him.
It wasn't time yet.
Yeah.
Let's now look at the topic of judgment, because we get a lot of insight into eternal judgment and the Son's role in that. Jim Miller, would you please read for us John 24-30?
Truly, truly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. Truly, truly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me.
Thank you, Jim. So this is a powerful moment of preaching on the resurrection of the dead and the body. I mean, notice how Jesus puts that right in there in the context of having healed this man. I mean, why now?
Or maybe he knows his time is limited and he needs to get as much out there as possible.
Yes, I mean, if you look at John's gospel as it flows, here in the 5th chapter, Jesus is already preaching judgment, resurrection, his authority over both.
Could it also have something to do with the fact that he's in a religious center in Jerusalem, delivering this message?
It's a major festival with a lot of people.
This goes back to when he healed the ruler's son, when he's, again, back to your son will live. He's not necessarily talking about physical healing, he's talking about eternal life, and this is where Jesus now, the interesting thing is the woman, this is complete, the woman at the well, and who he dealt with, and then the Herod's official who he dealt with, they were not Jews, but this guy had to be a Jew because he was able to go to the temple. So the first two people, so now he's bringing this whole understanding of the resurrected life to the Jews, and they're not receiving it. Where did we hear that before? You know, where else? You know, it's interesting.
Is this statement before Lazarus? Lazarus was this before that situation? That's what it says here. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come forth. So it's almost like a prediction. Watch for, without them knowing, something evil is going to happen. Maybe I don't know how far down the road that
And
took
what we'll
place.
see is after he raises Lazarus from the dead, that's when they really want to kill him.
And it states he has that authority too in verse 21. When he says, the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to those whom he will.
Seems like Jesus had this speech plan, and he decided to heal this man mostly as a way of getting attention. And he had this gigantic, bright billboard to roll in, and display to say, look at this is dazzling. And then when he got their attention, they were mad at him because this guy was walking around with his mat. And then he decided to lay into them with his spiel on the Son of God.
Absolutely. Like the man we looked at last week from Mark 2, who was lowered into the house. It was ultimately to show that Jesus had the authority to forgive sins. The healing was just the means by which he could do the teaching. And that was always his purpose in the healings, was to get people's attention, to show his authority, but actually, the real authority was what he had to say about himself. And that's happening here too.
Back in chapter 2, he said, destroy this temple, and I will raise it up, meaning his body. So who else has ever raised themselves from the dead? He raises other people from the dead. He's going to raise himself from the dead, as well as God the Father and God the Holy Spirit is.
He's really rewriting kind of the criteria, the parameters for judgment. I mean, just think about all these Pharisees over time sitting in a room saying, okay, you can walk, but you can't carry a thing that's 5 pounds. And they're coming up with all these arbitrary, metrics, if you will, on how you're going to judge somebody. And basically, Jesus comes along and says, none of that really matters, okay? What matters is more about your faith and what you're thinking about. So you really kind of putting that whole system basically on end. Or flipping it, basically.
It seems like in Mark, he kind of touches on it with that verse about when he approaches the Pharisees and explains it. But here in John, is John's gospel more theologically orientated? So he's going into a whole theological discussion or this is the gospel, this is theology, this is it. What else can you
I
say?
see a lot of red there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, does it open up to the Gentiles? Because all of a sudden, if the judgment is not gonna be affected by all the stuff that basically all the rules and stuff that the Pharisees have laid out, then it's really open to anybody. You don't have to be, where a lot of that stuff applied to Jews. This is basically the way his judgment is, it applies to anybody.
Well, they showed that with the woman.
Right.
And the official.
Right.
They were not Jews.
Let's hear from Paul when it comes to judgment, 2 Corinthians 5:10.
We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive what is due him, whether things done while in the body, whether good or bad.
So Christ does the judging. Last week we had John Tuthill read Daniel 7 for us. You want to do that again?
Oh, yes, please, yeah.
This is the allusion to the Son of Man that John's giving us here that Jesus is talking about, which is a messianic title and is a symbol of Christ's judgment. So that's, again, Daniel 7, 9 to 14.
As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and his hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, the books were opened. And then I continued to watch because of the boastful words of the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
So back
Amen.
to verse 26. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man.
Revelation chapter 5, 2. The Lamb is slain, and John wept because there was nobody there to break the seal. And he lived.
You see how otherworldly this gets. Here Jesus is with the crowd doing his teaching, and suddenly we're taken up high. The prophecy of Daniel to who he really is. Make our judgments of each other seem so ridiculous, correct? I mean, and that's what's going on with the Pharisees. Their sense of judgment is totally irrelevant.
They would have recognized the Son of Man. They would have known exactly what he's talking about.
Okay, now there is one description of the final judgment in the New Testament, and that's given to us by Matthew. And I would like Bill Bennett to read that for us, please. That's Matthew 25, starting at verse 31. And just to give you a little background, most scholars believe that this description of the final judgment was really for the church, for believers, how they take care of each other in terms of appearing before the judgment seat of Christ. So let's consider what Matthew says about this.
Start at 31.
31 to the end.
Okay. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on the right hand, Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see thee hungry and feed thee, or thirsty and give thee drink? And when did we see thee a stranger and welcome thee, or naked and clothe thee? And when did we see thee sick or in prison or visit thee? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Then he will say to those at his left hand, on his left hand, depart from me, you cured into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, Lord, when did we see thee hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to thee? Then he will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous down to eternal life.
Jesus talks about my brothers when he talks to those on his right. He doesn't say that to those on his left. So, most would interpret this to say this is how we as the church treat each other. Those who recognize Jesus as King and as a brother, and how we respond to each other with that. Which actually connects with Jesus saying, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you.
Interesting how many places he embraces the broken, the woman at the well, the crippled, and admonishes the ones that think they're all pretty good. Like the sheep over here, the goats over there. Just thinking that all this is so incredibly deep if it gets into your heart. It's incredibly, it's incredibly cerebral. It's just mind-boggling. And the poor Pharisees had no idea how to digest this in their heart. The man that he healed received grace just by him being healed. The woman alone received grace just by the dialogue they had. But here he's saying these incredible statements to a large group of people that had no idea how to get their hands around it, other than to stone to death because they can't deal with it.
That's right. And the question is, how did people come to believe? Some did, but many were blinded, as Jesus said. You have all the more sin because you who can see, or you who are blind, say you can see. That'll be in John 9. So they're blinded, can't see. Like Paul the Apostle. He proved in the stoning of Stephen. And then suddenly, scales fell from his eyes. He can see. So it's a work of the Spirit, isn't it? There's nothing Jesus could say that would convince them intellectually that this is true. Quite the opposite. And that's why Jesus taught in parables, to confuse people, so that if they did come to believe, it would be really clear that it wasn't some kind of intellectual assent to an agreed upon idea.
Where does the right and the left come in? I mean, I'm just trying to interpret the right hand, I suppose. I mean, I know one's sinister.
It's a
With-
political thing.
Don't go there. I mean, what's the
Well,
interpretation biblical?
The idea of sitting on one's right hand is the place of honor. Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father.
No, he's there.
Elijah.
Elijah, I was gonna say, yeah.
But that's really, the reference is like a king with those on his right hand. That's why they say the king will be seated on his throne to execute judgment. So it's really a symbolic position.
And going back to that, the Lord opening your eyes, and so forth. I think a God, I've heard it said that a God that you could reason to really wouldn't be a God. It has to be the other way around. That he is the God that allows you to be able to reason in the first place. But we don't grant him lordship. It's already a fact.
All right, let's bring it home. Let's finish this chapter, all right?
All right.
Bill, or excuse me, George, will you read for us John 31 to the end? George. Yeah, sorry.
If I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid. There is another who testifies in my favor, and I know that his testimony about me is valid. You have sent to John, and he has testified to the truth. Not that I accept human testimony, but I mention it that you may be saved. John was a lamp that burned and gave light, and you chose for a time to enjoy his light.
Can I stop you right there? Now, Bill, John 1:8 for us. Bill Nichols.
He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light.
Carry on.
I have testimony weightier than that of John, for the very work that the Father has given me to finish, and which I am doing, testifies that the Father has sent me. And the Father who sent me has himself testified concerning me. You have never heard his voice nor seen his form, nor does his word dwell in you, for you do not believe the one he sent. You diligently study the scriptures because you think that by them you possess eternal life. These are the scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life. I do not accept praise from men, but I know you. I know that you do not have the love of God in your hearts. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe if you accept praise from one another, yet make no effort to obtain the praise that comes only from God? But do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom your hopes are set. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I said?
There's a lot of theological truth in this. What are some things you're hearing? Ron?
Well, I think the interesting thing when he talks about the reference to Moses, how different. Moses had the Ten Commandments and all about very definitive laws. And if you look at most of the Bible is basically about biographical experiences. And you look at Jesus' approach, it's all about testimony, examples, experiences, and how to convey things as opposed to getting really concrete, definitive laws. So I think it's quite a quite different approach. It kind of sets the whole framework for how things are going to be judged in the future.
Certainly is sort of putting a liar at the Pharisees.
This isn't necessarily the meek and mild Jesus that children often are introduced to.
Yeah, right.
He is both. He's gentle, his yoke is easy, his burden is light, but he's also executing judgment even now. On those who would keep others from being free, that's the ultimate issue here, isn't it?
What I find interesting is that he refers to, people believing in John, they gravitated to him, but then he says that his testimony was greater than John's. But John had basically acknowledged that he was coming, this man was coming, and that he couldn't, I forget the way it was worded, but he couldn't tie his shoes. There was something about laces or something that somebody is coming I can't even, he's coming, greater than I am. I'm not the one. He basically acknowledged that this was going to happen. Like he was kind of, Jesus, I guess, is probably saying, you know, you listen to him more than me, and gravitating. Why aren't you listening to me? Even though John had said that this was going to occur. Somebody greater than me was coming, that I couldn't carry his jockstrap, excuse the terminology. Had to say it. But you know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's kind of what it was. Yes, kind of what it was.
He was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his light.
Hmm.
And how wonderfully that matches up with the prologue. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness to him. And John was pleased to play that role, as we saw, in the signpost to the sign. Let's spend our final moments and talk about this connection with Moses. If you believe Moses, you believe me, for he wrote of me. I mean, wow. Think of that sound. He wrote of me. They're not amused. But remember on the road to Emmaus, when Jesus instructed them, starting with Moses and all the prophets?
You can have that coming from the lips of a young man, and talking to older, highly respected Pharisees. They would, Moses wrote about me. That's incredible.
Remember when Jesus was teaching in the temple at the age of 12? And the teachers were amazed at all that he knew. I've often wondered, did they remember him? It's almost like they have no memory of this young child who could teach so well. It's like they're meeting Jesus for the first time. We don't have anything about that, but they were willing to listen to him when he taught them at age 12, or at least dialogue with him.
Kind of a novel thing.
This is different, though.
This is
Yeah, this is different.
Now he's going to follow him. Then he was just there on his own. His parents were looking for him. So maybe he's got influence on the crowd. They don't like that. Maybe that's what it is.
He's challenging their authority. He's basically saying that, I'm in charge of, I'm just reading that says you diligently study the scriptures because you think by them you possess eternal life. I mean, it's just, see, it's not going to happen through your religion or through your study of scripture. You can't create altars to what you've done or what you've read. And at the same time, Jesus couldn't have been frustrated with it because he knew that there's no way they could hear him or see him without the work of the Spirit.
And we're told that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. So the Word is left off the pages now. It's actually with them. God's Word written. It is God's Word. But the Word, the Logos, is pre-existing. And suddenly among them, full of grace and truth.
But the thing too, Moses isn't the end game. And he never, it's like he took the Israelites to the promised land, but he never went into the promised land. So he delivered them to a certain point, just like, to the land part of it, just like he kind of took the people to a certain point in terms of their faith, but you needed to go beyond that and deliver them to what ultimately became Jesus.
A great discussion, as always. Any final thoughts or insights? Well, Vito, why don't you read for us the road to Emmaus? We might go a little bit beyond 8, but that's okay. Luke 24, 13 to 35.
The occurrence on the road to Emmaus. Now that very day, two of them were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus. And they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place?" there in these days? And he replied to them, What sort of things? They said to him, The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. Our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to be sentenced to a sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all this, it is now the third day, and since this took place, some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came back and reported that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive. Then some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the woman had described. But him they did not see. And he said to them, Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory? Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on further. But they urged him, Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. And it happened that while he was with them at the table, he took bread and said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. But he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us? So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them, who were saying, The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon. Then the two recounted what had taken place on the way and how it was made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Let us pray. Lord, we thank you that our hearts burn within us as we read your holy scriptures and as you will reveal to us through your Spirit. We bring before you tonight, Lord, any concerns that are on our hearts right now.
I'd like to pray for